Sally Lyndley, and welcome to the Lyndley Trend Report. On this episode, I'm going to chat with you about a very inspiring woman named Lee Miller, who again was inspiration to Phoebe Philo at the Celine show this season. And Lee Miller has come up over and over again in fashion as an inspiration throughout the years. Since I've been reading Vogue and studying fashion, she's been popping up here and there, I guess because she's one of the few women of this last 100 years that has been super influential and was really brave and incredible, person inside of art and just inside the fashion business. So Lee was born in Poughkeepsie, New York in 1907. And when she was 19 years old, she was discovered by Condé Nast, the man Condé Nast, who owned Vogue, obviously. And she was about to step out. She was in New York. She was about to step out in front of a car. And he kind of was like, yeah, don't do that. You're going to get killed. And was like, oh, wow, you're really pretty. Come and be a model for Vogue. And she was on a cover for Vogue that year. So she had a very successful modeling career for 2 years. And it ended up ending in a very bizarre way. One of the pictures from one of the photographers she'd worked with for Vogue one of the photographers from Vogue at the time ended up selling one of his images as a Kotex ad. So she was like basically a maxi pad model, and it ended up ending her career. So after her career kind of abruptly ended because of some like crazy feminine product debacle, she went to Paris because she was always interested in photography. Her dad was a photographer. Her dad had a dark room and really kind of immersed she and her brothers in photography from a very young age. So she decided that she wanted to go work with and study under the artist Man Ray, who lives in Paris. So she shows up on Man Ray's doorstep in Paris in his studio and is like, I want to, apprentice for you. And he's like, no, I don't take students, but, she's like this gorgeous woman. So she ended up becoming Man Ray's assistant and muse lover, and then later also ended up taking a lot of his photographs during the 1930s. From about 1928 to 1932, a lot of the photos Man Ray took were supposedly taken by Lee Miller. So Man Ray could focus on his paintings. So, I had first found out about her because I saw her in images that Man Ray had taken. And they always did really interesting things with like silver effects and oxidation effects in the darkroom, and really interesting burning and dodging and really interesting exposures. So I was always a really big fan of Man Ray for that point, even bigger fan of Lee Miller now that I know that she worked with him to develop a lot of these techniques. She got bored of Man Ray in Paris and ended up leaving and moved back to New York and met an Egyptian railroad executive, big, huge Egyptian tycoon, married him and moved to Cairo. So in between Paris and Cairo, she lived in New York. She had a photo studio that she ran with her brother, and she did lots of portraits of all the surrealist artists. When she was working with Man Ray and left Man Ray, she became known as a big surrealist artist and photographer, and her crew that she hung around with in Paris were all the most influential surrealist painters, from Pablo Picasso to Jean Cocteau, all of that whole surrealist crew. So, she was a very influential woman kicking around in this posse, a lot like Hannah Hoke, who was kicking around the Dada artists, but she was kind of the only woman really rolling with that crew. So I don't know, I find her very interesting, going from something like modeling to, shacking up with Man Ray and taking all of his pictures, learning art from him, becoming an artist herself in her own right, and then getting bored with all of that and deciding to marry an Egyptian tycoon, move to Cairo. And when she worked in Cairo, apparently she still continued her photography, although she didn't consider herself a photographer and artist anymore. Some people consider her surrealist images that she shot in the 1930s in Cairo to be some of her most surrealist style work. So she's a very interesting woman. When the war broke out, so she got tired of the guy in Cairo. She was like, forget this Egyptian dude, I'm moving back to Paris. She moved back to Paris, and she totally fell in love with another artist. This time he was British. His name, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes, was Roland Penrose. And I've heard of Roland Penrose, and I know a little bit about his work. I'll put some of the information about him below in the links. Was a British painter and a curator, and also a surrealist. So she fell in love with him. They were running around. She didn't get divorced, but she was running around with him, moved with him to London, to Britain. They lived in East Sussex. And so when World War II broke out, she decided she wanted to be a war correspondent and do photojournalism for Vogue. So she enlisted as a photojournalist in 1942 and started shooting some of the most insane pictures that were taken of World War II. She shot the first napalm in France. She was in France, months, like less than a month after D-Day. She shot the liberation of France, and she shot many, many concentration camps. She ended up teaming up with a life photographer while she was there. She seemed like she liked to team up. She liked team spirit. And he took his name was Sherman, sorry. His name was Sherman. And he was a correspondence for Life, a war correspondent and photographer for Life magazine, which was one of the biggest, photojournalism magazines at the time. And he was the one who took the famous picture of her in Hitler's bathtub with the combat boots, and she got naked and got in the bathtub and had him take pictures of her. And some of those photos are the most famous of that whole series. Also, her concentration camp photos ended up being some of her most popular work as far as the war photography was concerned, and some of the most disturbing things that she had done. But, again, this wasn't something that women commonly did. She was definitely, swimming upstream against the current on this one, but took some of the most arresting and beautiful photographs of that time. She ended up moving back to England, and she suffered from post-traumatic stress, and she ended up getting pregnant with the Penrose, the artist, and got divorced and married him to make her an honest woman. And then they ended up just buying a farm in East Sussex, and she gave up photography and became a gourmet cook and had an herb garden, and that's where her ashes were spread when she passed away. And it was just cool because when she moved and did her farm with her husband, it ended up being a big artist mecca where people like Picasso and Man Ray and her whole community from the surrealist world would come through and stay with them and relax with them on the farm for months, weeks at a time. So I really love this woman because she, number one, just didn't seem to care what anyone thought, just totally, marched to the beat of her own drum, and really did adventurous, exotic things that most women wouldn't have dared to do at that time. So I can totally understand why Phoebe Philo would be inspired by her, and many other people in fashion would be inspired by her. She was beautiful. She had incredible style. Her photographs are insane and beautiful. And I mean, as far as taking references from Lee Miller, again, I'll put the links of all my favorite books of her work and of her below. I'll do some links on some great Google image searching that I've done on her, and some mood boards for you guys. But more importantly, I think it's also, again, looking at the conversation of this really heroic woman who did really ballsy things, not only just in art and fashion, but also in like political and war times. Not a lot of women had balls to do kind of that thing. And I think that these are the women that the most influential women in fashion are inspired by. And I want you, inside of your own business, inside of your own fashion and beauty business, to remember, if you design for women, that these are the kind of women that are inspiring today's culture. It's not about ladies who lunch. It's not about, women who aren't doing powerful things. This is really about, a world conversation, a global culture conversation that's happening where women are, we're leading businesses and doing bigger things than we've ever done in all of women's history. So, I think that there's a underground revolution going on, and women more and more are choosing to do art and technology and lead big corporate businesses instead of settling down and having a family in their 20s. And, you know, Phoebe Philo and Miuccia Prada and Rei Kawakubo are three of those women. So looking at Lee Miller, again, take away also the 1930s, the 1920s and the 1930s, 1940s. All of these design conversations are very relevant. Celine was basically all the kind of nipped waist and then kick pleat style coats and skirts, and but it was also with that military vibe, the idea of taking kind of menswear, starting from menswear and applying it to women and what we need for our own wardrobes, and also giving it just enough of a feminine touch to make it what I think is a modern version of sexy. So take a look, check out the links below, check out Lee Miller's work. She's an incredible, incredible artist and a very important conversation in women's history. And yeah, so be inspired by Miss Miller yourself. Check you later, and I'll see you on the next Lyndley Trend Report.